Okay. All right, we're good. Solid. All right. Well, by my clock, it is 3:30. Thank you guys for being here after lunch. I greatly appreciate it. So, as you can see on the screen, the title for our time together is Tactics for Reaching the Unchurched. My name is Dean Meadows. I'm the Executive Director of the Daily Apologist, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that operates in the space of social media apologetics. I'm also the campus minister at the Blacksburg Church of Christ to the campus of Virginia Tech. And so today, we're going to talk about reaching the unchurched. And what we normally do when we talk about reaching the unchurched, we talk about how to get unchurched people into a specific place called the church building. All right? Now, you have probably heard about those tactics before. If you haven't, I would reference you to some people if you want to talk after that. What we're going to look at specifically is not how to get people into a building. We're going to talk about how do I reach unchurched people when the time comes for me to have a conversation with them. One of the scariest things that we do or that we participate in or think about is, how do I talk to somebody that doesn't look like me? How do I talk to somebody that doesn't act like me? And how do I talk to somebody that doesn't believe what I believe? All right? So that's going to be the nature of our conversation this afternoon. And I anticipate it and want it to be a conversation. Who here has ever sat in a lecture before for school? We're not going to do that. All right? So before we dive into this particular material, I want to ask a question of the group. Who here has ever had a conversation with somebody who was a non-Christian, who was maybe spiritual but non-religious? Maybe they were an atheist, maybe they were part of a denomination, something like that. All right, I want somebody to, or a couple of you, to share with me the worst conversation you've ever had. What did that look like? Where do you think that went wrong? Just so that we kind of have a baseline of, hey, people have had this experience before. I'll share mine first, okay? And then you can share yours. So while I was at preaching school, we did a campaign, a mission trip to Utah. You probably know where this is going since I mentioned Utah. And so we were there to do a door knocking campaign in Tooele, Utah. We knocked one day 100 doors in a day, and 98 of them were Mormon. We had a Baptist and a Catholic that lived with the Mormons, okay? And so we ended up having a conversation with one of the Mormon elders, right? And they said, hey, let's meet up at this park and have a conversation. So we met with two Mormon elders, and it was 7 of us, 2 of them. And for 2 hours, we hammered them. We're not talking like cordially asking questions about why they believe what they believe. We're talking everything from insulting their faith, insulting them, insulting their position in the church. And at the end of that conversation, somebody in our group, it might have been me, I don't remember, it was over like 12 years ago. I remember somebody asking those 2 Mormon elders, when can we study again? What do you think their answer was? Not a chance. And that began to transform the way in which I personally approached conversations. So that's my worst conversation that I always go back to when it comes to personal evangelism and trying to reach people who are not Christians. Anybody else want to share a bad experience? Yeah, go ahead. What's your name, sir? Nice to meet you. Right. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but I want you to start thinking about, why do those conversations get so heated? Don't answer that now, but think to yourself, why do those conversations get so heated? Why is it that when I talk to somebody, or have talked to somebody that doesn't believe what I believe, that the blood pressure rises? You know, it's like the old cartoon where the face turns red and the smoke come out the ears, right? Some of y'all have watched Looney Tunes before. Not all of you, right? Some of y'all are like, what are Looney Tunes? But that's a generational thing. We don't have to get into that. And so think about why that takes place. And I hope that by the end of our time together, I've at least planted the seed of having better conversations. One of the reasons why people do come to a knowledge of the truth is because the person on the other end establishes a relationship with them, and they have a sense of trust with them. All right? Who here is converted by somebody that was a complete stranger one day at the gas station? Who is converted by a family member or someone that you trusted, that you knew you had a relationship with? Exactly, right? And so just be thinking about that. Now, before we get into kind of the tactics area, one of the things that we have to understand is, anybody here think that we live in different times than when you were younger? Like, I'm 35, and I'm like, it's a little, what is it? A whole new world, right? Aladdin, right? Whole new world. Not really different than even the time when I was in high school. And what we see today is we see some of these things, right? Who here has heard people say the phrase, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. It's okay for us to have that disagreement. Or, hey, I'm proud of you. You just go and live your truth. I'll live my truth. And that way we don't have to argue about this stuff. All right? That's the world that we live in. All right? Probably even when I was 15, you could go into the town and you could knock on somebody's door, and the conversation was about, okay, you've got John 3:16, I've got John 3:16. What does that mean? The conversation was about which interpretation is right. Now you go into a town, or you do a door knock, and you open up a Bible to John 3:16, and they say, I don't necessarily know that I believe that that's true. Everybody see where I'm going with that? We have a saying. I was also in the Marines for 6 years. We have a saying called, is everybody tracking? And you respond like a tank. Okay? All right. We live in a world where it's you live your truth, I live my truth. We live in a world where all of the established institutions have got to be torn down. All right? That includes the church. The church is an established institution. All right? They don't know what to replace it with, but they just know it's got to come down. We also live in the world of social media, right? Where are the vast majority of young people seeking value, worth, and validation? Online. Online. Well, part of that reason is because they don't feel that they can have good conversations about what they're dealing with in the church. Okay? And so over the process of time, they may be sitting in your pew, but they are just as unchurched as people outside of it. Okay? You don't believe me? Well, I'm going to scare you a little bit. All right? We live in a world where we're told that we're born particular ways. Right? We live in a world where we hear things like, love has no limits. Anybody heard the phrase, love is love? Right? Okay, well, how do you have a conversation with somebody that truly believes that without getting riled up? Right? Without having smoke come out of your ears. All right? Let me ask you this question, and this is a rhetorical question. I don't need hands up, okay? This person walks into your congregation holding hands with their partner. What do you think your initial reaction would be? Don't answer out loud. But here's what I'm going to challenge you with. How you react to what I just said indicates whether or not you're ready to have a conversation with that person. It indicates whether or not you're ready to have a conversation with that person. Okay? And I think all of us, I don't think anybody here rolls out of bed and goes, you know what, I really hope that a lot of people go to hell. Anybody do that? I don't think anybody in the church does that. I think all of us, within the core of who we are, have a desire to see people who are lost be found in Jesus. But where we struggle in the church is how do we have meaningful conversations, okay? And this is what's happening all across the West. I had a conversation just the other day with a friend of mine who goes to church in Great Britain, the United Kingdom. And I asked him, how many people in the United Kingdom, what's the percentage of people in the United Kingdom who go to church every single Sunday? Anybody want to take a guess? Don't answer, because you know. Anybody want to take a guess? Huh? More than 1%. Huh? 5%. 5% of people in the United Kingdom go to church every single Sunday. And if you've looked here recently, the number of people who identify religiously is down. The number of people who say that they would go to church weekly is down. The number of young people who are identifying as religious is down. Notice this, 47% of American adults say that they belong to a house of worship. This is the lowest percentage since Gallup poll began tracking this, that says state should be stat 8 decades ago. 47%. 68% of adults agree with this statement. There is no one true religion. Many religions can lead to eternal life. How do you have a conversation with that person? Like, how do you have a conversation with a religious pluralist? We're going to go and we're going to say, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. But they're entering the conversation by saying, well, that's one path. That's one way to look at it. I mean, you live your truth, and I'll live my truth. That's what the church faces, okay? That's not where we're going. That's where we are. And we have to realize that. And we have to adjust to that. And part of the way that we do that is through our conversations. 4% Gen Z, the youngest people in America, 4% of Gen Z claim to have a biblical worldview. What that means is God exists, Jesus is His Son, He rose from the dead, the Bible's inspired, the Bible's inerrant. 4%. Now, most of you have probably have kids and grandkids that come to church very regularly. You don't think they're going to be influenced by that group? Online, at school, when they go to college? And one of the reasons that they struggle is because we struggle. I fully admit the millennial group did not do Gen Z any favors. All right? We didn't do them any favors because we said, this stuff really doesn't matter. But they asked more questions than any other generation ever. The running joke about Gen Z is, the great thing about them is they ask questions. The bad thing about them is they ask questions. Right? And so, how do I train my young person to engage with a group of people where only 4% have a biblical worldview? All right. Atheists among Gen Z is double that of the general population, 13% to 6%. All right. There's an elephant in the room in the church. And that elephant is, I don't think anybody misses the fact that culture has changed. All right, but oftentimes our reaction is this. What solutions do we have to this problem? We sit around the table. What's in the middle of that table? Nothing. So what do? We double down on the things that we know. We say, well, and this might get lettuce thrown at me, but I'm okay with that, okay? What we do is we double down. We say, well, if we just lock them in the church building long enough, they'll stop asking these questions. If we just keep them at camp long enough, they'll stop asking these questions. And so what we do is we say, well, if we get scared, and what does fear usually produce? Fear usually produces anger. And our kids see that. The people that we go to church with see that. And when you're angry about something, more often than not, you don't think rationally about how to solve the problem. And so what happens? Young person comes to us. I'll tell you this story. And I may break down, but it's okay. A buddy of mine who is responsible for converting me, his brother, who's like a brother to me, went to a brotherhood school. Sophomore year, he got involved with some philosophers who were taking a philosophy major, and they were not Christians. They started asking him serious questions about why he believed what he believed. So he had a crisis of faith. He goes home, and he says, my preaching dad, who's been preaching for 25 years, he can answer this question. He goes to his dad, and he says, Dad, these are things I'm being taught or being talked about at school. What's your answer to that? Help me out here. What's his dad answer? He looked at that kid, and because he wasn't ready and wasn't prepared, he looked at that kid and he goes, you need to stay away from that stuff. Later, when I was doing my master's in Christian apologetics, I had to do a worldview interview, and I interviewed him. I said, when did you lose your Christianity? He goes, when my dad gave me that answer. Because he told me to run from the question, not seek answers to the question. He didn't want to have the conversation when I wanted to have the conversation. All right? That can't be the church. Let me ask you a question. Name me one time somebody asked Jesus a question and he didn't have an answer for him. Acts chapter 17, right? Paul is speaking and moving in the marketplace, in the synagogues. The Epicureans and Stoics come to him. Say, what's this babbler wish to say? He got called a babbler. They told Paul, you're really good at saying a lot of things that mean nothing. Did Paul answer the question in Acts chapter 17? All day. Right? We should be a people who are comfortable with answering questions. And right now, on a very large scale, we're not. Right? So how do we get better at that? So then what do? We breathe fire. We yell at our kids. We yell at our fellow Christians. Like, I cannot believe that you would even endorse that. Well, why not? Well, I don't know, but you just shouldn't endorse it. All right? So let's chat. There's a strategic way to handle those types of conversations. You've gotten the person into the building, you've gotten the person into your home, or maybe you've gotten the person to in a position where they want to have a conversation. How do I handle that conversation? All right. So, being the Marine that I am, rules of engagement. All right. How to minimize nerves and blunders in a conversation. Whether you believe it or not, you can blunder a conversation. Right? Because you've experienced when someone blunders a conversation to you, when you've tried to have a meaningful conversation with somebody, and they're just like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Or like, don't ask me that question, that's for somebody else. All right? I can't believe that you would fall for that. Get out of my face. We've all experienced that. And we've all done that. Okay? Guilty as charged. I sat in the library one time. I was supposed to be working on a paper for school. Meanwhile, I'm just blasting Catholics all day. Professor walks in. What are you doing? Blasting Catholics. Your paper's due in 2 days. Where are you? Haven't started it. There's a problem there, right? All right. Don't talk about things you don't know. Anybody here ever met somebody that absolutely, positively did not know what they were talking about? Raise your hand. Some of you are like, my husband, my wife, right? We've all met people who don't know what they're talking about. I mean, look at a politician, right? That's a joke. It's a joke. Okay. All right. Don't talk about things you don't know. So if I'm in a conversation, I've now got this unchurched person into the building or a situation where they want to have a conversation, and they say something like, I don't believe the Bible because I think evolution's true. Guess what? If you don't know anything about evolution, don't talk about it. Yes, sir.
Can I change that a little bit?
Sure.
You tell that guy, I don't know anything about this topic, but tomorrow I will.
Right. No, and that's the point that I'll make later. He's got my notes. That's the point. If you're uncomfortable in that situation, it's okay to say, I don't know. There you go. Point 2. Say I don't know when you don't know. You will gain more respect with people when you say I don't know, and try to come back to that topic later than if you make up something and you get caught in a lie. Right? Most unchurched people that you will come in contact with, and I can say this, I deal with atheists online every single day. If you get caught in the trap, you're in trouble. If you get caught in the lie, you're in trouble. They're already stereotyping you as a particular type of person because you said you're Christian. And definitely if you're a Southern Christian. Okay? So say, hey, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know. That alleviates you and me from the pressure of, I've got to have an answer for everything that they say. All right? I can't tell you how many times in an online discussion or in a debate with somebody online where they've made a good point, and I said, listen, right now I don't know. Would love to have another conversation about that offline or online. I mean, our conversations with people should not be a conversations to produce a series of gotcha moments. Okay? We don't have conversations with people so that we can tell a really cool story to other people in church. Man, I really showed that atheist the other day. Could you show me a passage in Scripture where Jesus bragged about putting the Pharisees in their place? I don't see one. I mean, he looks upon the city and says, I wish that I could have been like a mother hen holding her chickens. Right? Compassion that's there. All right. Don't get ambushed. All right? So if someone says, hey, I'd like to sit down with you and 3 or 4 of my other friends and have a conversation. If you're not comfortable with that, if you're not ready for that, say, no, I'm not ready for that. I'd rather have a one-on-one conversation with you because it's easier to track a conversation one-on-one than to try and answer 5 people at once. All right? Then the other rule is don't set an ambush. Okay? Don't get trapped in an ambush. Don't set an ambush. If you tell somebody or if they agree to talk with you one-on-one, do not show up to a conversation with 4 people. Make sense? Because at the moment that they sit down thinking that they're having a conversation with just you, and it's you plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, you've automatically just violated their trust before you've even opened your mouth. They don't trust you. All right? If possible, set a meeting date. Okay? Why do we set a meeting date? Why? Why would I want to do that? Okay, so part of it comes back to commitment. You and I have both mutually agreed that we're going to sit down at this point, at this time to talk. All right, why else would we set a meeting date?
Take some of the stress off, get more prepared mentally.
What is your name? Give that woman a gold star. All right? Absolutely. When I set a meeting date, I now know that I have X amount of days to prepare for this conversation. All right? I know that in 2 weeks, I'm meeting with Joe, Bob, Bill, whoever, and we're going to have a conversation about Christianity. And what you should do is try and narrow down the topic. They say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about Christianity. What specifically would you like to talk about? Because Christianity is a big thing. I mean, you got existence of God, you've got Jesus, you've got all of these theological topics. Narrow it down. Narrow down that topic when you set the meeting date, and now what I can do is I can start to prepare. Notice, I'm preparing to engage a person. All right? When I set the meeting date and I set the topic, I've committed to that person. I'm going to talk to them. And now I'm preparing my mind for that conversation. The biggest points in our life when we blunder with a conversation is to try and enter a conversation without being prepared. Anybody here ever done that? Yeah, all day. All right. So those are the rules of engagement. The last one. That's not because it's less important than the others. I just want that to be the last thing that you see on this slide. Pray, pray, pray. All right. Jesus himself separated himself from his disciples so that he had time with the Father. Paul says over and over and over again in his letters, I pray. All right? So that's what we want to do. Everybody got those rules of engagement down. All right? Those will aid you in what I call the pre-engagement process. All right? They just help you prepare for the conversation. Any questions, comments? Accusations of inaccuracies? Not all at once. Okay. All right. So let's move to the conversation starter. So now that we've got our rules of engagement, we say, how can I start a conversation with people? Anybody here struggle to start conversations with people who are not believers? Anybody? Show of hands. Why is that hard? Why? Why is that hard? Because it is. Why is it hard? Fear, who said that? Fear of failure, right? We struggle to have conversations with people because what if they know more than me? What if I don't say anything? What if I don't have an answer? Right? So we go back to our rules of engagement.
What if I make it worse?
Yeah, what if I make this worse? Right? But let me ask you a question. If I've set the date and I've set the topic and I've studied, odds are I will lessen the probability of making it worse. Right? Anybody disagree with that? I mean, I could blow my stack in the middle of the conversation, but if I've set time to meet somebody and I've set the subject and I've prayed about it consistently up until that point, probability is less that I'm going to make that worse. But that is part of why we struggle to have conversations with people. I don't want to make it worse. All right, what else? Why else are we do we fear starting conversations? Do what? Rejection. I'm scared that this person that I love dearly is just going to reject me. Now, what's wrong with that mindset? I've just put the weight of the gospel on my shoulders, and have not allowed myself to understand that I'm just the messenger. I didn't create the message. I'm just the messenger. So if they reject me, they're not really rejecting me. They're rejecting what? The truth. We have to stop being so self-centered when it comes to evangelism in this regard. Okay? That hurts us. All right? I can pray about it. I can set the time. I can set the date. I can follow all the rules of engagement. But at the end of the day, I've got to get into a mental space where I say, it's not about me in and of myself. This is about Jesus. Look at Paul. How many different people groups did Paul engage in his ministry? I mean, we'd be here for a long time if we talked about that. And how many times in those, I'll go back to Acts chapter 17. Where in Acts chapter 17 does Paul say, I'm going to tell you this, but I'm really scared that I might fail? He didn't say that. All right. So, one of the things I can ask, one of the most common questions you get asked everywhere, how was your weekend? What do we normally talk about? Did you see the football game? Right? Well, I was with the family. We were out on the lake and this, that, and the other. What about if we reroute the answer to that question with, this is what I learned in Bible class? Like the preacher made an amazing point from Romans chapter 6 that I never saw before. And this is what he said. Hey, listen, once they asked the question, they got to listen. Right? Once they asked the question, they got to listen to the answer. So why not take that moment when they're saying, how's your weekend, to route them to what you learned and were fed spiritually? It's a great conversation starter. And in that conversation starter with, like, what do you think about that? Like right here, we were, I mean, there are really two times a year where a lot of people go to church, right? December, right? And Easter time, right? And most preachers, right, wrong, or indifferent, don't know where everybody is on that, right, wrong, or indifferent, will preach about those things. And so if you're at one of those times, why not bring that up? say, like, did you know that after Jesus died, like the disciples went and they locked their doors because they were in fear of the Jews? Like, have you ever heard about that before? Because I just learned about that Sunday. What do you think about that? They got to listen, and they'll give you an answer. But that's a conversation starter. All right? All right. So I say passive-aggressive evangelism. What I mean by this is I am doing passive things consistently to evangelize. Let me give you an example of that. So I'll give you two examples of it. So way back when I first started going to college, my brother asked me to come watch rugby practice in the middle of January. Anybody ever sat on cold metal seats in the middle of January before at school? Not fun. But I'm a good brother, okay? And I also have a book called Humble Like Me. You should read it. Just kidding. So I do this, and then there's a young lady who I know comes over, sits on the bench, and she knows that I'm a youth ministry intern at the local church. She knows that about me because I've told that to her before. And she said, hey, you are the youth minister intern at the Piedmont Church of Christ up the road, right? I said, yeah. She said, well, I'm gay. Do you think that I'm going to hell? First time anybody's ever asked me that question. So it's like, awkward party of two, your table is ready. Right? Now notice this. I didn't do anything. It's not like I promoted the fact. I wasn't sitting on the bleachers going, I'm a Christian. She already knew that about me. Let me ask you a question. Do people know that about you? Do people know by the way that you live and the way that you talk, the way that you act, that you're a Christian? Because once they know that about you, they will ask you questions. All right? And so she asked that question, and I said, well, I thought to myself, there's two ways I can handle this conversation. I can look at her and say, you're going to hell in a handbasket and have a good day. I mean, we laugh, but that's sometimes how we answer people. Do we not? Where's that gotten us? For a lot of people who are unchurched, that has caused them to see the church not as a place of compassion and mercy and grace where conversations can take place. That's the place you don't go for those things. That's why they're trapped in the world, right? So that's one route. Or I can look at her, and this is what I did. I looked at her and said, hey, that's a great question. That's an important question. That's an emotional question. What do you think about Jesus? Because that question answers all of the other questions, not just about this, but about the rest of your life. What do you think about Jesus? That led to an 8-week study about who Jesus was. She did not become a Christian. But the end of that conversation, if I can't get somebody to a place where they understand who Jesus is, and we're not at a space where they are committed to Jesus, the next best thing that I want is what she said. I've never had somebody talk to me like that before. That's a Christian. Now, that's a good thing that somebody has done that. It's a bad thing that that was the first time it's ever happened. All right? So that's what we do. What do you think about Jesus? It's a question people have been asking for 2,000 years. Right? So, when you're in that... Yeah, go ahead.
That exact situation presented itself to us one time in Cal State, San Bernardino, California.
Right.
Presented that saying, I'm gay. You think I'm going to go to hell? He was wearing a What Would Jesus Do WWJD bracelet. And one of our guys pointed to his bracelet and said, what would Jesus do?
Right.
And that became an opportunity. We eventually converted.
Right. And that's awesome. But notice, took the opportunity to say, who do you think Jesus is? What would Jesus do? That's a great question to ask people. Okay. Second time this happened. And be consistent. Anybody here frequent coffee shops? Any chance? Anybody here have a place? Nice. I was gonna ask a question, but I'll save that for later. Anybody here go to specific places consistently where there's a high density of people outside of church? Work, coffee shop, work, where else? Like your house, right? Where people come over. All right, in those places of work, you need to have something on your table, at your desk, in your car, on your person that says that you're a Christian. What do I mean by that? So I'm in Starbucks, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? That's where the world goes for their coffee. That's where I'm going to be. I sit at the table next to the door where everybody enters and exits. They know that I'm there. The baristas know who I am, and I do this everywhere. Baristas know who I am, and if I'm working on a paper on philosophy, I'm going to have 2 books, one on the resurrection, one on natural theology, just sitting there. And you'll be amazed at what people will ask you. Hey, are you a preacher? Well, why do you ask? Well, I saw the book there, and I just wondered, like, are you a preacher? Are you in seminary school? Well, why you ask? Well, because I saw the book there. Had one of the people that works at Starbucks, they came over and they said, are you a preacher? Well, why do you ask? Well, I saw the book on the resurrection and natural theology and figured that you might be religious. I am religious. I'm the preacher of the Gastonia Church of Christ here in Gastonia, North Carolina. Well, can I ask you a question? Sure, what's your question? Well, I'm a transgendered woman in a gay relationship. Am I going to hell? Never heard that one before. Okay. Why don't you sit down and let's talk. What do you think about Jesus? 8-week study on who Jesus was. Didn't become a Christian. Gave the same compliment the lady on the bleachers did. I know we disagree, but you're the first preacher to ever talk to me like that. You're the first preacher to ever entertain that question the way that you did. Acts chapter 17, some mocked, right? Some asked, some said, hey, we want to hear more. Some believed. Passive, aggressive evangelism. Passive actions consistently. All right? I mean, maybe it's one of the things, maybe you work in industry. Maybe you go to work every day with something that's got Jesus written on it. A Bible verse that's on it. Maybe you wear a bracelet. Maybe it's a book on your coffee shop, on your desk, or a multitude of books. Maybe it's the things that you put up in your house. Hobby Lobby sells them all the time. Right? Your coffee mug. John 3:16 is on every coffee mug that any Christian could ever sell. Any Christian store would ever sell. Use those things. Be known as the person in your workspace. I'll get to you in a second, Brandon. Be known as the person in your workspace that walks around with the Acts 2:38 mug. Heritage, right up here. Will negotiate with you if you just put in an application, right? Doesn't mean you have to go. They'll give you a mug. Buy a mug from Freed. Buy a mug from Heritage. Buy a mug from these preaching schools. Take them to work with you. They will look. I can't tell you how many people at Virginia Tech at a coffee shop called Coffeeholics, great name, come up to me and say, what is Heritage? Great question. Navigate through that conversation like, so what do you think about that? What do you think about Christian schools? They good? They bad? You like them? Not like them? Because what I'm doing is I'm getting them, and we'll talk about this in a second. I am probing for information. All right, Brandon, go ahead, and then we'll get to number 3. Yeah. Ask you what, right. Nice. Listen, I walked around Seal Beach, California, with a shirt that says, does God exist? And you would not believe how many people walked up to me and said, yes, no, not sure. Like, went for a walk for about an hour, took about 4 hours because I'm answering questions with people. And listen, I've got to get to a place mentally where I'm okay with doing that. And part of that comes from training. Part of that comes from implementing this stuff. All right, Hey, interesting, whatever you have. What does that mean? Maybe you see something on somebody else's shirt. Maybe it's a tattoo, right? Maybe it's something on their coffee spot. Maybe it's something in their house. Hey, that's a interesting tattoo. What does that mean? Oh, well, that's a tattoo that's related to my Wiccan religion. Happened. Okay, well, what is the Wiccan religion? What? Help me out there. What does that mean? All right. So these are just, are these like super complicated theological doctrines that you got to disseminate in order to understand, to apply? I don't think so. These are things that you can ask in the course of everyday conversation. All right? And that if you do that, you will see that people are more willing to talk than maybe we think they are. You think that we live in a society that doesn't want to talk about these things? They do. All right. All right. So once we've utilized the rules of engagement, once we've implemented some of these passive aggressive tactics, when I'm in the conversation, one of the first things I want to ask somebody when they say, "Hey, that's a tattoo that's related to my Wiccan religion." Okay, how did you get there? Right? How did you arrive at that conclusion that the Wiccan religion was true? Or somebody says to you, I used to be a Christian, but I really hate the church now. How did you arrive at that conclusion? I used to believe that God exists, but I don't think that God exists anymore. Well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? I don't think truth is absolute. There's a follow-up to that we'll get to. But how did you arrive at that conclusion? Why do I ask that question when I'm having a conversation? Why do I want to ask the question of, how did you get there?
To better have the conversation, to understand how to get them back.
Okay, that's part of it. Part of the reason is I want to rescue that person from where they are. But what does asking that question do? It causes them to think, but it also causes them to open themselves up and tell them their story to me without me probing more. I sit back, I let them tell me my story, and as they're telling me their story, which I'm, by the way, genuinely concerned with. Okay? I don't just ask that question so I can start forming answers. But I am thinking about, okay, well, that's an interesting point, or here's an interesting question for a later time. Go ahead. Yeah. How many conversations do we sit down and we say, okay, you're a Baptist, I'm a member of the Church of Christ. You believe once saved, always saved. I believe baptism. Here's why you're wrong. What about, hey, thanks for sitting down. How did you arrive at the conclusion that the Baptist religion is the correct religion? Like, they'll probably say, well, I used to be here and I got here. Or they'll say, well, that's how I was always raised. Right? What are they telling me? They're telling me their story. They're giving me insight into their worldview without me being aggressive. They're just telling me their story. All I got to do is listen. All right. So how did you arrive at that conclusion? Then, once I ask that question, as I process their story, the next question that I want to do is, or one question I want to ask is, what do you mean by that? I don't think that God exists. Okay, you said the word God. What do you mean by God? Are we talking like pantheon of gods from Mount Olympus? Like Disney movie Hercules God? Right? Or are you talking like God of the Bible? Are you talking God of the Quran? Are you talking Hinduism? Like, what do you mean by God? Right? Now, why do I ask that question? Go ahead.
So often in these conversations I've had, I find out whether or not they actually believe what they think they believe, or if they've just bought into something and have the inability to actually explain what it is they believe.
Exactly. The reason why I ask this question is because maybe I'm confused about something they've said. I want them to clarify. I want to see if they actually know what they're talking about. All right? So someone says to you, yeah, I don't believe Christianity is true. I believe in evolution. Okay, what do you mean by evolution? Because there are like 8 different definitions. What do you mean by that? Right? You- Right. Right. And so I asked a clarifying question because I, one, want to know if they know what they believe, but two, I don't want them to be offended because I've misunderstood what they've said. All right? And so then, once I ask, how did you arrive at that conclusion? And then I say, what do you mean by that to some areas of clarification? I follow through with, well, if this is true, then how does that impact our lives? So you heard me say, someone might say, I don't think that truth is absolute. Okay, well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? What do you mean by truth? And then, if what you're saying is true, that truth is not absolute, isn't that an absolute statement about truth not being absolute? Oh, well, yeah. So I ask if-then questions. I want to drive home the conclusion of what they've said based upon my ability to understand their story and gain clarification. All right? So you said that evolution, you don't believe in God because of evolution. How did you arrive there? What do you mean by evolution? You think that evolution just means change over time? Well, if that's true, can't we both agree that a lot of things change over time? Like, I used to be 2, now I'm 22, now I'm 32. Right? Isn't that change over time? Yes or no? Okay, so if that's your definition of change over time, I don't think that word means what you think it means. Right? Princess Bride reference, by the way. All right? But these types of questions, notice, how many of these statements on the screen are, you're dead wrong and you know it? None, right? And so, and we can have these. We've talked about this. They see that we're genuine, gives us an opportunity to get clarification, requires the other person to show the depth of their understanding. Any questions about this? Yeah, sure. So an example, there's no such thing as truth, right? Example, morality is a construct of culture. Just had this conversation the other day with a lady that left the church, like a sister to me. We were going to do a movie, and I said, hey, I can't go to the movie. I can't pay for it because I have only brought the company card for the Daily Apologist, and I'm not going to use that to pay for a movie. And she goes, well, isn't that what all preachers do? They kind of just like manipulate the money that the people give for themselves. Now, notice, was I hot under the collar? You better believe it. But notice, I do what Paul did. I can bypass the insult to get to the soul. I said, that's interesting because who cares about stealing if stealing is just a construct of the culture? I'm like, I looked at her like, it sounds like you think stealing is like objectively wrong. She's like, it is. I'm like, so where do you get that from? How do you get that from a culture that constantly changes? She said, I don't want to have this conversation with you. Literally, that's what she said. I said, I understand that you don't want to have this conversation with me, but I would just like to tell you, you really need to think about that. And we were done. Go ahead. There's a reason why that's there. Right. 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 I mean, remember they get on him about the Sabbath, and he asked the question, hey, which one of you, if your ox fell in a ditch on the Sabbath, wouldn't go get it? Yeah, with questions. Listen, the best evangelism tool that you can have in your tool belt is the ability to ask really good questions and not make aggressive statements. We live in a culture, and this is going to get me in trouble with my own people, my millennial people, right? We live in a very sensitive, soft culture. And that doesn't mean we compromise truth. We just adapt the way in which we evangelize to people. All right? Not to compromise truth, but to get to the soul, get to the heart of the matter. Yes, sir.
How do you get to the point where you're trying to convince them that there is a book which is from God, which is inerrant, and that's what they need to follow?
Well, that all. Oh, sorry.
Big question.
Right, absolutely. So here's how I'll answer that. Is it depends on what background information you have on that person. If that person grew up going to church, there's a sense in which they already understand what the book means to be inerrant. And so what you have to get them to see is that the worldview that they currently hold is flawed. Like if they are an atheist because they used to go to church, and now they're an atheist, well, they don't believe in God, that God exists anymore. So starting out with, well, this book is inspired. Inspired by who? God. I don't believe that exists, so I don't care about that argument, right? So you have to do some work of, all right, let's revisit the God claim. God exists. All right. Now, once I've moved them to, hey, God exists, then I can get to the point of with an atheist. What I like to do is I like to say, all right, let's pause on inspiration. Let's just go historically reliable. Is it reliable historically? Like, did Jesus rise from the dead? If Jesus rose from the dead, then that says something about God. It says something about Jesus. It says something about Scripture. It says something about the church. And so I would run that route and say, do you think Jesus rose from the dead? Because if he did, it says something about those four things. All right? And so really the conversation about the text being inerrant is going to come after you've established that God exists and the document is historically reliable. Okay? Yes, sir. I know. I'm over. I mean, we could talk about this all day. You guys have been great. I hope you.
I'd like to talk to him a little later about that same question.
Gotcha. Yeah, no problem. So, anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right. Thank you so much for being here.